So again, if you're just joining, my name is Dan Beerens. I'm the co-host for this webinar today, along with Elizabeth Dombrowski. Elizabeth is the executive director of the CLC network in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And Elizabeth, for any schools that are joining us that may not be familiar with the CLC network, would you please just share a little bit about CLC's mission today?
Sure. Our mission is to help support persons at all levels of ability and disability in their communities. We do that by partnering with faith-based churches and schools across the country.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We are excited to have two panelists with us today as well. We have, first of all, Megan Willink from North Point. She's a middle school principal there. And they'll be sharing their perspectives with us later on in our webinar. We also have Mark Buteyn as the head administrator at Central Wisconsin in Waupun, Wisconsin. Great to have both of you, Megan and Mark, with us today. You can say hi to the group.
Thank you. Hello.
Hey, everyone.
Great. Well, I think we have a unique opportunity with this topic and our work in schools. If you read my recent blog post, I got a bit personal in there in terms of why I feel so strongly about inclusion. You're welcome to read that, but I talk and work a lot with schools around distinctiveness of their mission and really what is your ultimate picture of beauty in the school that you're working in? And is it a copied mission from schools around you, or is it a biblical mission? What does that biblical picture of beauty look like? And so I've been very impacted by a couple of writers, Flantiga and Wolterstorff, who talk about the idea of shalom and flourishing as the central task of a Christian school. I love the quote where we talk about the ideas of really a vibrant community of delight and joy and love. And it also presents really a countercultural picture, I believe, to our society, because our society values other things, the achievement of man, individual talent, personal independence, awards. So our mission really needs to stand in contrast to what society tells us that man is really on the throne, or that man is central. We seek to help our kids worship God in all ways. So three reasons really for thinking about this. We're living in a time where we have a lot of partisanship and division happening, particularly in the United States. And so I think inclusion is one of those issues that unifies a community. It shows what it means to be the body of Christ. Jesus was always reaching out to the marginalized in his society, demonstrating love, justice, compassion. And so I think as Christian leaders, Christian school leaders, we really need to do the same. Secondly, are we fully realizing our mission? I think if we're only selecting certain students and certain financial capabilities, we really are limiting ourselves in achieving the fullness of our mission. And so we see each child as having particular needs, and what we choose to fund really makes clear our values. And is it about really, are we valuing each student, or are we sorting? And again, copying other models that are out there. What are our values about? And then thirdly, I think focus on flourishing of all students is really a worthy goal for us, because we then really celebrate the image bearer in each of our students. So that's our opportunity before us. Why do we seek flourishing, or why would we say we seek flourishing for our students? Well, number one, I think we ought to seek flourishing in our schools for all, because we all bear God's image, not primarily out of charity or compassion, but because of the inherent worth of each individual. Secondly, I think we can flourish because we're one in Christ through the work of the Holy Spirit. This speaks to our community together and our committing to all learners of every type. And thirdly, we help students flourish when we help them know and live the truth of Jesus Christ, when we're educating all aspects of the human being, head, heart, hands, so that we may serve the world. Then we may help these kids serve the world as a response of gratitude and worship back. And fourthly, I believe flourishing happens best in a school culture where everyone belongs and is an interdependent part of the body. So really, CLC has done a wonderful job of articulating these aspects of community, collaboration, and culture. I love alliteration, of course, but they've done a great job of articulating these in a new set of standards for schools that Elizabeth will speak to in a moment. But first, Elizabeth, really, what would you say are the particular aspects of inclusive education?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to go about it, obviously, but we like to focus on two main themes when we talk about inclusive education in the Christian school. You know, a public school will also endorse inclusive education, but we can do so differently as Christian schools from a place of belief, a place of biblical grounding. And so we talk about belonging and friendship as those two main themes and beliefs that we strive to achieve in everything that we do around inclusive education. So we want to always stress that students with disabilities belong in our communities, they belong in our Christian schools, they belong in our churches, that they are here because we need them just as much as they need us, if not more. That this is a community, that this is a body of Christ together. The second part, the friendship piece, is that we are going to intentionally cultivate that mutuality and interdependence among students with and without disabilities. And so that's another piece of building our communities in Christian schools that we can uniquely focus on from a faith point of view. So I'm really excited about some deeper ways that we've gone to in defining that success. Megan, who will talk in a little while, was also on the team that we put together this summer to compile the Christian School Educational Services Standard. It is available now on our website at the website listed here. But before you go, looking at that, I want to talk a little bit about how we structured it and why we defined it in this way. We like alliteration, obviously, with community, collaboration, and culture, but we wanted to do it in that order. So first of all, that community piece is saying we are committed to community, that we want to recognize and include our community in our school, and we want our school to reflect the body of Christ in a very real way. So in the standard, under community, we have indicators on your mission statement and how you have tied inclusive education to your mission statement, what your admissions policies look like, what those conversations with parents look like, even what that budgeting process might look like. And then the collaboration piece is putting the structures in place to make sure that every student thrives in your school. So collaboration among board and staff. So really setting up your support services staff to be consultants to the general education classroom. So the deeper part of that belonging piece, again, is that those students belong in the general education classroom first. And then we do have, pullouts as needed, but we're really wanting them to thrive in the general education environment first. And then our support services staff serve as consultants, diagnosticians, troubleshooting, and we have a list of roles that serves in. Dan, the slide just disappeared.
Just doing a switcheroo here. In a minute.
Okay. And then the third piece is the culture. And that is, as you know, you make that commitment, set up the structures of that collaboration, then you want to see that really infiltrate every piece of your culture, so that the language that everyone uses to speak to each other and to coordinate and to troubleshoot when things become challenging, because they do, that you have a strong backbone of faith and order in which to respond to those things. So those are the things we saw as some of the most important things in the roles that we see those playing in the successful inclusive Christian school. And perhaps Megan can share a little bit more about that. Dan, any luck with the slides yet?
Are the slides back or not? I'm sorry.
No, they are not.
Oh, I'm sorry very much. Are they back now?
No, not yet.
Okay. I do apologize. Let me go back here, and now they should be hopefully appearing. Are they back now?
No, they are not.
Okay, let me try one other thing here. I'm using two displays, so my driving is, are they back now?
Nope.
Okay. My apologies. Perhaps what we could do in the meantime is just continue on with conversation with Megan. And what I'm going to do is double check my screen share here and make sure that I didn't lose something in the process.
So Megan, perhaps you can begin to tell us a bit about your role at North Point. Feel free to add anything about the Inclusive Christian School Standard. And you can talk a little bit about how you have seen inclusive education at your school fit into North Point's mission.
Sure. Yeah, so at North Point Christian, I'm the middle school principal. I've been doing that probably the last 10 years or so. Prior to that, I was a teacher in the classroom, so it's been really exciting just to see how the process has gone from a classroom teacher where we had support services and special education, but we were limited into the kinds of students we serviced, and then moving into the principal role, just seeing the need more and more for fulfilling our mission statement, which at North Point Christian is to equip students to impact the world for Jesus Christ. And so we had a lot of discussions years ago that if our job is to equip students to impact the world for Jesus Christ, that means all students and not just some students. So what did that look like? Because as we looked at our school families and our school population, we would have most of the families' kids here, and then those that had higher needs would be serviced at the public school. And we didn't like that. And we didn't like how that felt. And we didn't like how we were missing out on the blessings that those kids could bring to our community. And so that being said, as we continue down the road of, hey, we need to be a full inclusion school, what does that look like as we fulfill our mission statement? Because like any school, our mission statement drives our decisions. How are we going to equip our teachers and our students and our school body and communicate that we are going to service all students of all ability levels? And so with that being said, you know, for a long time, we just kept saying, okay, it looks like this, and it was still limited. So as we continued to educate our staff with the help of the Christian Learning Center, which was a key piece for us to get everybody on board, that, you know what, we're already servicing these kids and we're missing out on some, like I said, but more than that, if we truly, the three things we always say at North Point is, if you love God, if you love kids and you love what you teach and you love communicating those three things, you're going to be successful. So we need to do that for all learners. And what came from that was the idea that we learned pretty quickly that here we are thinking, yay, we're finally servicing all learners with an inclusion program, but they were a much bigger blessing to our school community, and we probably learned a whole lot more from them than they could ever learn from us. So it really transformed who we were. That's why I'm really excited about the Christian school standard that Elizabeth was referring to, because it provides a framework for schools like us and others to say, what are the things that are going to help you do inclusion well and to service kids well of all ability levels. So having a standard to kind of walk through as a measuring tool, I'm just really excited about, because we're always trying to have, move forward and have a growth mindset. And that was another piece for us, setting the stage for growth for all staff members, families, and students.
Thank you, Megan. Can you talk a little bit about how, you talked a little bit about the factors that drove your transition into inclusive education. What about the other directions? So how has inclusive education kind of changed the way that you do things and the way your community sees you?
Yeah, no, I think it completely changed our culture, 100%. I think that, like I said, we were missing a really awesome population of God's children, and we probably mentally maybe knew we were missing it, but until you walk through that door, you don't realize how much you're missing it and how it changes you as a school. For us, inclusion became who we are, not just with students with disabilities, but it also, more than that, it helped us recognize there's more to educating the child than just their ability levels. So, they all come in with baggage and they all have different stories to tell. So how do we be intentional about changing some programs? How do we teach in the classroom differently? How do we teach kids to collaborate and learn from each other in really unique and special ways? I look at some of the programs we have now that we didn't have before because maybe there wasn't a need for it, but it really has helped just your regular ed students to think outside of themselves, right? We know that students, adults, all of us can struggle with selfishness, but it provided a framework for kids to really serve each other. So right now, we were talking just the other day in a staff meeting that specifically with our resource room, and then we have a large population of international students, the idea that we have ambassadors for both programs, and we have way more students that are ambassadors for those programs than we do have than kids in the programs. Kids are fighting over lunch buddies. I want to be a lunch buddy. Well, it's not your week. And you look at that and you think it's a bunch of high school guys on the basketball team that are fighting over who can bring, a student to lunch and be their lunch buddy. I mean, that's just the kind of thing that over time, and it doesn't happen overnight, that really transforms your school. So I think too, another piece of that is creating an environment where kids want to be a part of our student union, which is our resource room. The resource room staff has done a really good job of creating opportunities for kids to feel comfortable, to not feel like they're different for being in there. Something as simple as like a Toaster Tuesday, right? So this morning after chapel, I felt like I was spending a lot of time reminding friends that they needed to go to class instead of being in the resource room for Toaster Tuesday with whoever's in there, because that's something that has become a part of our culture, which is a really cool thing that kids want to be a part of it. So I just think those are neat. Also, just being very aware of what's next for these kids. So the transition planning piece as they move throughout high school and beyond, what's the next step for them? And we know that that's part of our job as we're educating these kids. So we had one of our first higher needs inclusion students graduate last year with Down syndrome, and we were like, we can't lose him. He's really been a huge part of our culture for so long. So taking the next step and saying, we're going to put a coffee shop in our school where that's his job now. Part of his transition plan is, hey, he works in here during the school day. He's being mentored by other teachers and students. So just being really intentional about what's the next step for these kids as well.
Thanks, Megan. So here's a big question on most everyone's mind, right? Is how do you fund it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And when I started, it's been good for me in my position to see just all the different thoughts as we started the inclusion piece, right? Because we had the resource room piece in place for a long time, but not the full inclusion program. We knew we were missing out on that population and we didn't have it in the budget. So what does that look like? And there was a lot of discussions on, do we use an outside donor to do those things? And we got to a place after talking with the Christian Learning Center and other schools and recognized we didn't want to be dependent on that. So we certainly made the sacrifice up front, like, nope, we got to put this in the budget. We know it's going to cost us. But more than that, we recognized it was such a blessing, we would never change it. So we were very intentional about putting money aside in the budget. And we would say, hands down, best decision we ever made, a huge blessing on a daily basis, but more than that, we have gained a lot more students from it, which initially was not something we had really thought about. Our goal is to educate families, and so often families were heading in different directions because we couldn't service all of them. So we have seen a huge payoff in the sense that I do think it has increased our enrollment as well.
Great. So what has been the most challenging part of your journey and how have you overcome it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say challenges are as unique as the students we serve as well as the blessings. We are blessed with just an awesome team that understands the delicate balance of inclusion. We need students and teachers that understand when to push forward to help peers accomplish their goals, but also have the ability to exercise wisdom in knowing when to step back and let inclusion work without interfering. And that's a hard thing that doesn't happen overnight. It's a process for sure. I would say for us, initially, it was a lot of fear from staff. Hey, can I do this? Am I equipped to do it? How am I going to educate them well? What is my role in all of this? So kind of helping them go back to, you love God, you love kids, you love what you teach, you love communicating those things. If you do believe that, let us come alongside you and get you the resources you need. So it was a lot of partnering with the Christian Learning Center to create resources for us, in services for us, just helping them really get their heads around how do you differentiate instruction, what kinds of accommodations, modifications need to be made, how do we partner and collaborate with resource room staff and classroom teachers, what is the balance there, regular roundtable discussions of, hey, how are you handling different kids, just getting groups of teachers together to just brainstorm ideas of ways that are working, and getting to know kids well. I would say the key for us has been, if you don't know kids well and have that relationship, regardless of who they are, you can't do your job as successfully as you could. So the education piece, the building the relationship piece, and then having a really clear plan for the enrollment process. So if they're kids that have been in our school from preschool through 12th grade, it's a little different. We know their families, we know their stories. We're planning for them. We have a lot of families that start in middle school and then a lot of families that start in high school. So we always say we want to walk through the enrollment process with you, but one of the things we want up front is the testing, and we take the paperwork from them. We have our resource room teacher go through that and have a little time to say, here's the plan we want to put in place. We might have a staff member visit the school they were at before. And then we sit down with the parents, usually an administrator, and then the resource room teacher for these students to say, here's the plan North Point Christian would like to put in place. What is your feedback? What are there changes you think need to be made, so that we can plan and make sure we have the staffing needed for that, or the training. So that's been a part of our process as well. I could go on and on. How's that for now?
That's great. Thank you, Megan. We did have a question come in about the types of special needs students North Point services from Lena Philbrick.
Yes, all students. So from wheelchairs to health needs to cognitive impairments, you name it, across the board. But knowing that, and that's part of the enrollment process for us, to make sure that, not that we would say no, but it's not like we want to have them walk through the application process. We want to get all of their information ahead of time so that we can make sure we have the best plan in place possible. And that's been a long process for us to get to a place where we feel really good about how we do it. Initially, when we started inclusion, it was exciting. We were excited to accept everyone, but we didn't always have the paperwork ahead of time. And so we'd catch ourselves in a situation where, oh no, school started, we're going to service these kids, but maybe we didn't budget correctly, or we need a part-time aide, or whatever that looks like. So getting that up front allows us to plan really well. So, you know, and people will say, well, how do you budget for that? We would say, you know, a lot of times families know ahead of time when they're coming. We walk through the summer months that way, but we ask for, hey, we want to service a full family. We want all the family members to be at our school. And if they're not, there might be like a something where we talk about, if you're only going to send us your resource room student because you're not happy with maybe what the public schools are doing, there's a chance you might have a small stipend to say we want everybody. We don't believe in charging more for families if they have a special needs student, unless they're only going to give us their special ed students. So I know this sounds bad, but we don't want to become a dumping ground, right, for just special needs students. We want full families.
Thanks, Megan. We have a few other questions that we'll come back to you on, I think. And so if any of the attendees have more questions, please submit them. Mark, can we move to you now? Sure. Thanks. So my first question for you is, just because I know a little bit of the history for both of you guys, your school has been serving students with disabilities for many years, but just recently you made a decision to focus more deliberately or intentionally on that. And so I'm wondering, you know, what changed and why?
Yeah, the history is a little bit interesting. About 10 or 12 years ago, we did our initial site study with CLC, and determined as a school community that there were students that we needed to serve better, and that we too also wanted to be available for those families that had students with special needs. And so we kind of stepped into this slowly and gradually, and the program initially really focused on, I would call it resource support, and that went along for about 8 years. And through that time period, we saw an increase in the needs of students and the desire, I would say, from families for a Christian option for their special needs students. And then at one of our education committee meetings, a member asked me, well, what is your vision for special education at Central Wisconsin Christian? And that just really set me back and made me think. And, you know, we had been kind of bumping along and doing okay, but I don't think we really had a vision. And over about a 6-month period, I've no doubt the Lord was continuing to poke me and prod me and saying, you know what, you need to get a vision here. And so about a year and a half ago, we began conversations with CLC to do another site study, and to help us really evaluate what we were doing and what we could do better, and almost kind of to do a reset mode and say, okay, who are you going to be to the community of believers? And so now we are in, I'm going to say, first full year of reset mode and becoming very intentional in inclusive ed.
Thanks. So how did you share, what is your vision now and how do you share that?
Oh, well, it really begins with some of what Dan was talking about earlier, the view of, who is a Christian community and who are our children as image bearers of our Lord. And when you take on that biblical vision, you find, or at least I found, that I do not want to deny a student an opportunity for having a Christian education. To me, that would really haunt me. Now, I also have to be a realist and say, well, there may be needs that we are not equipped to meet yet. And so we have to grow as a community. And I think that's been our commitment now, is that we want to grow to the point where we will take on those students with moderate needs and severe needs. We aren't there yet, but that's where the vision is taking us.
I'm glad to hear it. How are you funding that?
Interestingly enough, our board, once our ed committee caught this vision and presented it to our board was all in. And they said, we're going to fund it. We're going to make sacrifices. We're going to deal with tuition. We're going to, put it in the budget. If we fundraise to do it initially, we will. We haven't done that specifically, but they basically committed to exploring all options, because this is our calling as a Christian community, and so we're going to have to get it done.
Amen. What are some of the ways that you are responding to the daily challenges that I know everyone has, and what has been most effective in your responses and in your strategies?
I'm going to back up a half a step and say for us to reset our vision and to become more intentional, we needed to become more systematic in our approach. We were meeting kids where they were, but I'm not sure that we were really in a good strategy place with that. And so in the last year, through some training, through dialogue, CLC has assisted us a lot in becoming more systematic. And again, we have room to grow in that. When you have the system in place for identifying needs in terms of how you're going to approach those, then you can deal with the individual differences in students, because we would all like kind of a cookie cutter approach, or, give me the formula, let me apply it to a student, and boy, we'll crank out some great things. Thankfully, it doesn't work that way. Every child is incredibly unique, and that too with students with special needs. What works one day probably will not work tomorrow. And that's the frustration of it, but it's also the joy of it. And but getting a system in place, getting people in place, enables you then to take on those challenges and joys that come our way each and every day. I don't know that I answered your question, but
Oh, I think you did. Thank you very much. Dan, do you want to?
Sure. Let me jump in with a couple of questions that our group has raised back to us here. The first one here, in the schools of the two panelists, Megan and Mark, what kind of school staff works with the special needs kids? Is it school psychologists or education psychologists? This is from our friends in Spain where things work a little different. And so if you could just comment on what services perhaps you receive from public districts, and then I've got a related follow-up question.
Yeah, so for us at North Point, we require that every student in our resource room has had testing done so that they are on an ISP or a 504 plan. So they've walked through that process so that we're not just letting teachers send any student that might be struggling in the classroom down to the resource room. That's really important to us. And we've worked really hard to be in a position where there is documentation in place that says, yes, these kids need servicing. And as we see struggling learners in the classroom, we'll put together child study teams to try several things before they just have testing or whatever. In terms of the services that are provided, our local public school provides speech and language, some of those support services, depending on the needs of the students and what are necessary. They'll also provide, depending on where and the needs, they will do re-evals and initial evaluations for us as well. But we also get some of those done through the Christian Learning Center, who we contract with, who will complete some of those, and some that are done independently for families. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Thank you, Megan. Mark, you want to respond to that one?
I would say that we are very, very similar at CWC as North Point. There are a number of evals that are done at the school district level, and we do partner with the district and have a fairly good relationship with them depending on what the needs are. We have a number of students that come from area public school districts with IEPs, and then those are turned into a service plan where we dialogue with their professionals and with the parents in terms of what services we are able to provide. We also receive speech and language from the district. We also receive limited consult in OT and PT services, but then in relationship with that, we have on staff people that we are training and that work with those consultants in terms of, let's say, bringing on-site OT and PT services to our kids. We think too often there are kids that fall through the cracks. They may not really qualify. We'll say they don't qualify for two sessions of PE from the district per week, for example. But that doesn't mean that we can't provide that and provide that physical type support. And, we just have some people on staff that are very excited about being able to do that and intervene in ways that maybe the district would not be able to.
Wonderful.
I do want to add to that, Dan, a minute. I just want to clarify that in both of these schools and in most of the schools that we work with, the school psychologists are completing a diagnosis and an evaluation, and then handing that information off to support services staff. So the school services, the school psychologist is not the one working with the students in the building on a regular basis.
Elizabeth, could you reflect just a little bit? ELC is a national consulting group. Do you see a lot of differences between states in terms of funding that's offered by local public districts or intermediate units from state to state?
Oh, absolutely. Most states, you can get OT, PT, and speech, but it varies in terms of whether that's going to come on site to your school or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the biggest variances. And then the other variance is title funding. We see a lot of schools use title funding to help educate all general education and support services teachers, as well as provide consulting services to come alongside and troubleshoot when issues come up.
And for those of you outside the U.S., that's a federal program. So those are federal dollars delivered through the states by the local districts. A couple other great questions here that I'd like any of the three of you to respond to. I haven't heard the letters RTI yet, so if any one of you would like to explain to someone who's not familiar with RTI what that is and how it's been helpful or useful in your situation.
I can start.
Response to intervention. I'll remove the mystery here.
So it's response to intervention, and we look at RTI in conjunction with multi-tiered systems of support. So how are we making sure every student is learning? How are we assessing for learning? How are we screening, after that learning should have taken place to find out? So it's really an overarching approach to identifying the students who need support and making sure that support is provided. And then, evaluating how we're teaching those students. And then the beauty of being in Christian schools is that we can then change our responses to those at any time, right? We don't have to wait for a new IEP meeting. We can throw things on the wall and see what sticks today and what doesn't stick tomorrow, right, Mark?
Well, that's right. And interestingly enough, one of the tools that we are using are the DIBELS testing, DIBELS, and Elizabeth could tell us all what that stands for, probably. Diagnostic something or other. But we just completed our January round. And it's just a snapshot, but myself and some of our resource personnel in the last 2 days have been going over those results, and again targeting some students in conversation with the classroom teacher and going over the first question that we have to use, and that is, okay, what are we seeing in the student? Okay, and these are words that CLC uses all the time. Then what do we think, and now then what do we do? And the beauty of this is not an annual meeting. Okay, this is a spot checkup, and we're in a small enough situation where pre-K-12 of 300 students, where hey, we don't have to wait till next August to begin something. Let's respond to the needs. And just this morning, I had a discussion with one of my lead resource people, and her schedule is full, and we have other needs. And it's like, well, you tell me what the needs are, and then we have to get it done. And it's up to me to provide, different scheduling, different people or something. But in my mind, we aren't allowed to have kids with needs fall through the cracks. Okay, we have to meet them where they are.
Thanks, Mark. Megan, did you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, I would agree with everything they say and have shared. We definitely use RTI and DIBELS. That we use NWEA MAT testing is just another standard of measurement as well. But again, we see it as like a snapshot, just as Mark said, to say this is just showing us just one of the pieces of maybe where they're at, but we also look at what do we see in the classroom, and what do we need to do to change, just to really make things moving along, to bring our students along. One of the things we did in our middle school recently, just to give you kind of a tangible example, was looked at. Math is always a big one, right? So you got kids all over the board, and we said, based on several different intervention tools we've tried and different things we were seeing, we divided our middle school kids 6, 7, and 8 into a large number of groups based on results and what we're seeing, and created a 4-day math boot camp so that, and then put them all into different groups for that. So 6, 7, and 8s were all mixed in. And it kind of helped us fulfill a project that we had started where the kids were running their own businesses, and there was a lot of things they needed to know mathematically, and there was holes for kids in different areas. So just having, being willing to get your staff around the idea of being flexible enough to, throw out your lesson plans that maybe you had planned for a week based on your assessments that you've been doing. So,
Thank you. So, again, for those outside the states here, I'm not sure how prevalent DIBELS is around the world. It is a reading assessment. You can contact any one of these folks for more information about that. We have a question about a universal screening assessment to help track academic achievement and growth and to make program and intervention decisions. You mentioned map testing. Is that what both of you are using at this point for? Also a screening tool, the measures of academic progress or map test, I think is the most popular assessment in the US at this point. It measures where a student is exactly in terms of their ability. It's an adaptive test, so it goes up or down, and it gives a growth and expected growth score for a student over the course of the year. Again, if you're not familiar with that. Megan, I guess, did you create those flexible groups on math based on your map data then?
We did. For those of you, I'm sure if you've used it, I was at a school that I worked at before where we had a full-time person that was just in charge of 3rd through 5th grade tearing apart the results of map tests, because you can find out every detail you'd ever want to know, which is awesome, but super unrealistic for the day-to-day teacher. So yeah, I mean, you can use the map in so many ways, but we used the results of that and then gave a couple teachers and a resource room staff a sub for a day to kind of tear apart the results of the fall testing and teacher input for what we were seeing to create those groups.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Megan, I'd like to interject here too. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of the referral process working in conjunction with that screening process?
Yeah, so yeah, tell me what you mean. Like, ask me one more time, sorry.
Sorry, so you mentioned earlier the importance of the referral process, but you also have the screening process. And so, we've run across a lot the question of, is it the student needs more support or is it that teaching needs to change?
Yeah, I would say almost always the teaching sometimes needs to change in terms of the education piece of teachers. Teachers can sometimes feel scared to, oh no, I've got a student that I maybe am not sure how to educate. So giving them the tools to say, here's what we know about this student and here's what best practices look like currently. And it might not look like lecturing in front, but it might look like collaboration and different activities in the classroom that allow all learners to be successful. So an inclusion student might have 2 social goals they're trying to accomplish, and maybe one of the academic goals from the unit that the resource room worked on in conjunction with that classroom teacher, but helping them realize that if we structure our classrooms in a way that helps all kids be successful, then it's going to work out really well. And certainly it's the referral process too, right? We want to make sure that we know what we're getting into, that we have the documentation, that we know enough about that student, and that we've communicated that well to the teachers. But a lot of it is just the education piece up front and creating a culture in your school where it's okay to fail. How many times do we have teachers meetings where, I know this sounds silly, but we'll go around and say everyone has to share something that didn't work out in the last month, because that's part of learning, and it helps us create the environment that it's okay, just like kids fail, we're going to fail, but we're going to keep trying and moving in the growth mindset.
I feel so much better, Megan, after my screw up with the screen.
Oh, there you go.
I could demonstrate, what it means to learn right in front of you. some of these great questions have been coming from my friend Justin Cook, Director of Learning for Ontario Christian Schools. And he wonders if you'd be willing to share any documents or resources you've used in connection with the map data. Elizabeth, I don't know if you have a resource base like that at CLC on your website. Otherwise, Justin, I would suggest getting in touch with Megan, with Mark. I'm sure there are others that would be happy to share that. The map is a tremendous tool, and like Megan says, you get so many details because it's breaks it down by objective. So you can break out kids so many ways that you really need to know how to drive and work with that tool, and not have your teachers get overwhelmed with all the data. It's very powerful. Are there other questions? I'm thinking, Lena, with your question about, I'll ask the panelists if they have any thoughts about this, but she says, we're trying to figure out if educational psychology intervention in the US is the same as psychopedagogical intervention in Spain. Any thoughts on that? And I'm not sure. We might want to follow up with Lena offline with that, Elizabeth, and maybe your psychologist could talk with a little bit more with her about that.
Well, I'd be happy to compare notes anytime.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I thought I saw a hand raised here. I'm looking on our chat screen. If there are any other last questions, we do need to wrap up in the next few minutes here, but if there are any last questions, we certainly want to invite those. We've enjoyed this conversation a great deal. Any last questions out there? We do have some resources. I'll move off from Mark here a minute and show you some of the resources. I think let me encourage schools to get this first one up here, the Christian School Education Services Standard. Those are the standards that I referred to that CLC has developed. And they've put each of those they've developed multiple rubrics for each of those category areas of community, collaboration, and culture. And so I think it could be used really as a self-assessment for a school. And I'm not sure if that's your intention, Elizabeth, but they're really wonderfully done. I highly recommend them. Tom Hoeksema has been a leader in this area in thinking about intersection of faith and special needs. Retired professor from Calvin College. Barb Newman's an outstanding resource as well. A couple of her books are listed up here as well on the site. We have an invitation for you as well. We have another online webinar coming up on February 22, 1 o'clock Eastern time, so you can sign up for that on the CACE website. We do watch for the next 3 parts of the 4-part blog series that Elizabeth and I are writing. That will be on the CASE blog. And so we thank you for your participation today, and blessings on the remainder of your school year. This will end our webinar for today. Thank you to our panelists, Megan and Mark, and thanks to my co-host as well, Elizabeth. And thanks for your patience during this webinar today with my driving. So we'll see you next time, hopefully, on our next webinar. Thanks, everybody.